Hi, I'm Tony Mitra and I'm making this short video to clarify a few points. There is a press report going around which has resulted in some reporters calling me up, and there is probably a bit of a misunderstanding on the text of the press report. So I want to clarify it. First, I'm not a scientist, I'm an activist, a retired marine engineer, but I have access to and I'm a close friend of two leading scientists that have done heavy research on glyphosate, and they have published a series of peer-reviewed papers about glyphosate, and these are Anthony Samsel and Stephanie Seneff of USA. They have spoken with me many times. They have disclosed their new papers, what they contain, to me in a language that a normal person can understand, so I could make these recorded video conversations for the people, and these are covered in my blog. You can go and find those details, including links to those 6 peer-reviewed papers, one more coming on the way. Now, what does glyphosate do? Very briefly, I don't have time to elaborate. You can find them on my blog and on the papers by the scientists themselves, etc. Glyphosate is a chelator. It steals minerals, and if it is in your food, it denies you the ability to pick up minerals from the food, nutrients from the food, because the glyphosate grabs on half of them and makes them unavailable. This is number one. Next, it attacks your gut bacteria. This colony of gut bacteria do many kinds of essential services for you. One of them is digesting your food, and when the gut bacteria is damaged, the gut bacteria is given a new name, microbiome. When they are damaged, you have a series of diseases, starting with bad stomach, a series of diseases. So that's number 2, how it hurts you. Number 3, glyphosate is unique in the sense that it is an analog, it's a mimic of one of the essential amino acids that go into production of many of our proteins. We have 120,000 kinds of proteins in our body, and their body is constantly making new proteins to replace old ones, and etc. Glyphosate replacing glycine in the construction of proteins makes those proteins essentially non-functional or rogue proteins, and if those proteins end up wherever they do, you have a series of diseases coming from there, even synthetic diseases that did not exist before. This is a very serious matter and not properly understood, but covered by Samsel and Seneff in their paper. Again, you can find the links on my blog. Next, there is another suspicion that has not yet been written about, but already discussed with me by Anthony Samsel, and that is, he suspects that plants that have low level of glyphosate in them are physiologically altered. That means the glyphosate has an ability to affect the physiology of the plants somehow, possibly by attaching with the DNA, in the way that the plant begins to pick up more heavy metal from the soil than it would if it was not contaminated with glyphosate. This aspect of plant picking up more heavy metal than normal when it is affected by glyphosate is something of which he has seen the evidence in corn. He has not seen the evidence in daal and lentils, with Canada, which Canada is growing a lot to export to India, and India is importing a lot and eating. He suspects this would be the same for most plants, including lentils. So he is asking me to send him samples from these Canadian lentils that are coming to India, so he can also test if the same heavy metal picking up characteristics are similar in lentils as he has seen in corn, and that is a new threat to how glyphosate can hurt you. So these are all things about what glyphosate can do. If you want to know more, you have to read those papers or see my blogs, which covers the discussion with the scientists. Now, why this press report is talking about India is because I was involved in getting the Canadian government to test a lot of food for presence of glyphosate, thousands and thousands of samples of food. Canada is up to now the only country to have done wholesale broad-based testing of food for glyphosate. I had something to do with it, and then it took me some time to get Canadian government to send me the results of all these samples, which I analyzed and then published in the book Poison Foods of North America. And there it shows that lentils, which are not GM crop, these are not herbicide tolerant crop, these are not Roundup ready crops, they are conventional crops. They have far more glyphosate in them than GM crops. And these lentils are not the only ones that have high amount of glyphosate, higher than Roundup ready GM crops. There are many others like cereals like wheat and rye and oats. But I'm talking about pulses and lentils here because Canada is producing a lot of them, especially to export to India and to sell to the Indian diaspora who are living outside India and buy these pulses to cook food, and also to Indian restaurants all over the world. So Indians, I suspect, are getting a heavy dose of poisoning. I found out that India imports very high quantities of pulses from Australia, Canada and Myanmar, and I have seen some samples of the Australian moong dal, which also was imported by Canada and tested, and I saw the result. They are also highly toxic. So Canada and Australia are most likely sending very toxic foods, pulses to India. I suspect Myanmar may be the same because they buy a lot of glyphosate in order to grow their pulses to export to India, but I have not seen any test results. India needs to conduct high amount of broad-based testing of glyphosate in food so that people and release the documents to the people so the people know how much of their food is contaminated with glyphosate, and by checking up the details from my blog and from the works of Dr. Samsel and Senev, they can know how it can hurt. I can already see the symptoms of it when I look around. There is an epidemic of autoimmune diseases. I never saw this many of them among my friends and relatives. Even 10 years ago when I came to India, it was not so bad like it is now. I suspect glyphosate plays a very big role in that, and that is the story. But there is a misconception that Indian grown lentils are worse than Canadian. This is not true. There is one chart about split yellow peas that seems to indicate that, but there are lots of other pulses where Canadian grown lentils are far worse than Indian ones which are being imported, and Canada allows desiccation, which is why these non-GMO crops have so high amount of glyphosate. I believe India does not allow desiccation. There is certain amount of desiccation that goes on illegally. If you don't know what is desiccation, well, it is spraying glyphosate on crops that are conventional type, which will die if you spray the glyphosate, and they are purposefully killed and dried just before harvesting. This is called desiccation. This is what is done in industrial countries, in industrial agriculture, so that the plant is dead and dry before harvesting machines come in, which improves the efficiency. Anyway, so in short, this is the story about lentils, and it's not necessary that Indian grown lentils are worse than imported lentils. The split pea is only one example, but in general, Canadian lentils are far worse, Canadian pulses are far worse than what is grown in India as far as I can see, and India needs to get their government to test much more, and Indians deserve to know much more so that you avoid glyphosate in your dal like the plague. Thank you.